Arthur Wehrmuth crawled through the mud of the Philippine jungle. He paused to let a squad of Japanese soldiers march past. Once he was in the clear, Wehrmuth continued to stealthily make his way through enemy territory. He spotted a small hill that overlooked an enemy camp. Wehrmuth made his way to the ridgeline and took aim at the Japanese soldiers below, then unleashed a rain of lead from his Thompson submachine gun. The confused soldiers shouted, "How did American troops get behind us?" What they didn't know was that the Americans causing so much chaos and destruction was actually only one man, a man who would later be called the One-Man Army of Bataan. Arthur Wehrmuth was assigned to Company D of the 57th Infantry during World War II. What made this squad unique was that it consisted of mostly Filipino soldiers. A small group of American soldiers, including Wehrmuth, was attached to the 57th Infantry. The squad itself was nicknamed the Filipino Scouts, as their main mission was reconnaissance and infiltration behind enemy lines. Sent to the Philippines in 1941, it didn't take long before Wehrmuth was promoted to the rank of captain of the Filipino Scouts. As the much larger Japanese force pressed forward, Wehrmuth and his men repelled attack after attack. They were heavily outnumbered and outgunned, but with Wehrmuth's leadership they caused numerous setbacks for the Japanese army. In January of 1942, the Japanese launched an offensive against the Allied forces. It seemed that the American and Filipino soldiers would be overrun and the islands would be lost, but Wehrmuth had other plans. He grabbed his Thompson submachine gun, two .45 caliber pistols, and as many grenades as he could carry. He covered his skin in dirt and camouflaged his helmet with foliage. Wehrmuth snuck across enemy lines and hid in the dense jungle. He waited for a Japanese patrol to pass by. Eventually, a heavily armed squad crossed his path. He was so well hidden that one of these soldiers almost stepped on him. The enemy squad was heading toward the Allied lines. Wehrmuth knew that if he stayed with the squad, he would be able to surprise them from behind once they were engaged with the Allied forces. As the last Japanese soldier passed, Wehrmuth stepped to the end of the line and followed the Japanese soldiers as if he were one of their own. They proceeded miles through the dark jungle, the Japanese unaware that Wehrmuth had infiltrated their ranks. When the soldier in front of him made too much noise, Wehrmuth shushed him. The Japanese squad neared the fortified position of the Philippine scouts. Wehrmuth did not want to get caught in the crossfire from his own soldiers, so he decided it was time to get away, but not before causing a little chaos. Wehrmuth purposefully stumbled into the soldier directly in front of him. As he pretended to grab onto the man for support, he handed him a live grenade. Wehrmuth gave the enemy soldier a shove and then dove into the protection of the jungle. The Philippine scouts could hear screams from in front of him. All of a sudden, the grenade went off, taking enemy soldiers with it. More importantly, the explosion gave away the position of the Japanese squad. The Philippine scouts, with the help of Wehrmuth from behind, made quick work of the enemy troops. It was acts of courage and destruction like this that earned Wehrmuth the Japanese title the Ghost of Bataan, a name that he rightfully deserved, as each one of his adventures behind enemy lines got crazier and crazier. Although Wehrmuth was a one-man army and could cause mayhem by himself, he often worked with his close friend and brother-in-arms, Jock. Jock was a massive 6'4", 220-pound Filipino soldier. As they fought together, they quickly became friends who always had each other's backs. Wehrmuth liked working alone, but Jock was adamant he'd go with his captain as backup whenever Wehrmuth volunteered for a dangerous mission. Jock saved Wehrmuth's life on more than one occasion. The most notable time this happened was on a mission to uncover a Japanese tap into the Allied communication systems. This mission was so astounding that a portrayal of it would end up in wartime gum packages back in the United States. It had become obvious that the Japanese were able to tap into the Allied communication lines. They seemed to know too much about Allied movements and plans. The commanders asked for volunteers to scout the wires along the front lines to find and disrupt the Japanese wiretap. Wehrmuth was the first to volunteer. Jock immediately stepped forward to join his captain. They set out together to locate and dismantle the deadly problem. The two men made their way through the damp jungle. They had to dodge poisonous snakes, deadly spiders, and the watchful eyes of Japanese snipers. They searched and searched for the wiretap, but came up empty-handed. Wehrmuth and Jock started to make their way back to the Allied defensive position. On their return journey, Wehrmuth got tangled in what seemed like a vine at first. He tripped and landed in the mud. As he went to cut the vine, he noticed that it wasn't a vine at all. It was a wire. Wehrmuth and Jock followed the wire. Suddenly, Wehrmuth fell into a camouflage ditch, landing directly on top of a shocked Japanese soldier who was tapped into Allied transmissions. Wehrmuth pushed off the enemy soldier and drew his pistol like a cowboy in an old Western movie. He fired and killed the Japanese soldier who was too slow to draw. Wehrmuth slowly made his way to the recording equipment to get a better look at how the Japanese had tapped into the Allied communication system. He was so fascinated by the technology that he did not notice two other Japanese soldiers who had crept up on him from behind. The sound of a branch snapping behind him caught his attention. Wehrmuth spun around, but this time he drew his gun too slowly. One of the Japanese soldiers plunged a bayonet into his arm. The rusty metal scraped along his bone and pinned him to a wall. Wehrmath knew he was in big trouble. There was only one person who could save him. He called out for Jock. "Japanese! 2 more down here!" he yelled. Jock raced to where his captain had fallen into the ditch. Without hesitating, Jock jumped into the hole. He landed hard on the ground below. When Jock looked up, Wehrmath was struggling in hand-to-hand combat with the Japanese soldiers. Jock pushed off the ground and launched his huge body toward the assailants. He used the butt of his rifle to bludgeon one enemy unconscious. Jock next turned to the second enemy. He shoved him away from Wehrmath and shot the remaining Japanese soldier. After the threat had been dealt with, Jock ran over to Wehrmath to tend to his wounds. His captain had nearly passed out from the pain in his arm and loss of blood. Jock carefully removed the bayonet and bandaged the wound. He threw Wehrmath across his soldiers and carried him back to the safety of the Allied base. If it weren't for Jock, the one-man army of Bataan might have died in that Japanese ditch. This story and the exploits of Wehrmath made it back to the US. He was seen as a living war hero. The successful mission of finding and dismantling the Japanese wiretap by Wehrmath and Jock made headlines. It was so well known that a drawing of the mission was placed in the wrappers of wartime gum to help fund the war effort. Wehrmath spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. He would get patched up, and even before the doctor gave him the all clear, he would ask to be sent back to his squad. His next exploit was so insane, you won't believe how he managed to get out of it alive. Allied headquarters had determined that the only way to disrupt the Japanese advance was to destroy a bridge that allowed them easy access into the area surrounding Manila. There was only one bridge in the area, but it was deep behind enemy lines. Someone needed to sneak far into Japanese-held territory and blow up the bridge, otherwise Allied forces would quickly be overwhelmed. Arthur Wehrmath volunteered for the job. He set out just before dawn when the sun was low in the sky. Most of the Japanese soldiers were still asleep at the time. Wehrmath carried the 2 5-gallon drums of gasoline with him to create a distraction before he blew the bridge up. He made his way into the town of Calagiman, which is where the bridge was located. He stuck to the shadows of alleyways to keep out of the sight of enemy snipers and guards. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers inhabited the town. It was a main hub for transporting supplies. The plan was that once Wehrmath set fire to the town, the Allied artillery would unleash a barrage of shells on Calagiman. This would serve as a distraction so that Wehrmath could make his way to the bridge and detonate the TNT to destroy it. He snuck to the far end of the town and began spraying gasoline onto the walls of the thatched roof buildings. He struck a match, set the buildings ablaze, and waited for the chaos to ensue. Japanese soldiers ran out of the burning buildings on fire and screaming. They rolled on the dirt ground to put out the flames as artillery shells began falling from the sky. Wehrmath made his way to the bridge. He tried his best to stay in the shadows, but he was running out of time. He made a break for the bridge, running up one of the main streets. Wehrmath was spotted by the enemy soldiers who began shooting at him. He dodged fire in the streets, ducked under the flying bullets, and dove for cover. He caught his breath and began running toward the bridge again. He was almost there when a stray bullet ripped through his leg. The pain was immense, but Wehrmath ignored it and sprinted to his target. He placed the charges while providing his own cover using his Thompson submachine gun. He blew up the bridge successfully and disappeared into the jungle. Upon returning to the Allied headquarters, he was debriefed and sent to the hospital where the bullet was removed from his calf. This was when Wehrmath received his first of several Purple Hearts. After the surgery, Wehrmath had no choice but to wait in the hospital until his leg healed. However, as soon as he felt strong enough, he discharged himself and returned to the front lines to join his squad. He continued to lead his men with bravery until March of 1942, when Wehrmath and his Philippine scouts were ordered to recapture Mount Pukat from the Japanese. This was a suicide mission, but Wehrmath was not going to disobey orders, and he would do everything he could to take the high ground. It would be an uphill battle that would nearly cost the one-man army of Bataan his life. As the squad moved up through the jungle, they were ambushed. One of the enemy soldiers rushed toward Wehrmath, trying to stab him with a bayonet. Wehrmath dodged the attack and wrestled the Japanese soldier to the ground. He pulled his knife and plunged it into the enemy. The Philippine scouts fought off ambush after ambush, losing men in the process. They dealt heavy losses to the Japanese forces as they pushed forward, but the cost was great. As they fought up the mountain, bullets ripped through the jungle trees and into the squad. There was a Japanese machine gun dug in across a stream. There was no way for Wehrmath and the Philippine scouts to move forward without destroying the machine gun first. Wehrmath mustered his bravery and led the squad in a daring counterattack. He pulled the safety ring out of a grenade and tossed it at the machine gunner. As the grenade left his hand, Wehrmath was struck in the chest by a bullet. The bullet chipped a rib before passing through his lung. Members of his squad grabbed their captain and pulled him to safety. They retreated back to base to get Wehrmath to a hospital. This wound was the worst one yet. The doctors told Wehrmath he was done fighting and needed to stay in the hospital. But Wehrmath knew his brothers were still out there trying to take the high ground. He would not abandon them. Wehrmuth was in the hospital for about a week until he could wait no longer. Against doctors' orders and with pus oozing out of his wound, he made his way back to the Philippine Scouts, but it was too late. The Japanese forces were pushing the squad back. Wehrmuth was too weak to sneak behind enemy lines and ambush them like he had done so many times before. He called for a retreat. As the squad made their way back down the mountain, Wehrmuth slipped and tumbled down a ravine, slamming his head on a jagged rock below. He was knocked unconscious and had to be carried back to the hospital by his squad mates. This would be the end of the reign of the one-man army of Bataan. While in the hospital, the Japanese defeated the Allied forces in the area and took all who remained captive. But his fight to survive was not yet over. Wehrmuth was so wounded that he was unable to be sent into the Bataan Death March, where around 70,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war were marched 70 miles to a POW camp. Thousands of soldiers were forced on the trek and died en route to the prison. Once he recovered, Wehrmuth was sent to work on building a runway for Japanese aircraft to land. He and the other men working on the project sabotaged it so the runway buckled under the weight of landing bombers and damaged them. He was then put on the Hell ship, Oryoku Maru, as one of 1,620 prisoners. This ship was bombed on December 15, 1944 by aircraft from the USS Hornet. The American ship thought the Oryoku Maru was carrying enemy troops, not prisoners of war. The mistake cost the lives of several hundred POWs, but Wehrmuth survived this ordeal as well. Eventually, Wehrmuth was imprisoned in Mukden, Korea, where his prison camp was finally liberated by Soviet forces in August 1945. When he was returned to the American military, he weighed almost 80 pounds lighter than at the beginning of the war. Wehrmuth was finally going home, where he would receive the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions in the Philippines. He had become a household name in the United States as a war hero, affectionately called the one-man army of Bataan by newspapers and civilians alike. Arthur Wehrmuth was credited with over 116 kills, received the Silver Star, and 3 Purple Heart medals. Now watch the most hardcore American sniper, the White Feather, or check out the insanely crazy story of a tiny soldier.